Well, where do you want to start? Should we start with The Exorcist? I want to say that's his biggest film. That's the one that people
It's
might think first
Yeah,
with
between that
Friedkin.
and The French Connection, I would
Yeah.
say, because I feel like those are two of the most defining films of the 1970s.
Yeah.
For many others could certainly fall into that category, but within his own filmography, the way that they both sort of revolutionized their respective genres, with The French Connection, obviously, with the action film genre, that wonderful
Mhm.
car chase that's in that film. That I mean,
Yeah.
it's one of the greatest car
Legendary.
chases
Yeah.
of all time. It really is. And then,
Mhm.
of course, what The Exorcist did with the horror genre, which you can maybe argue that some of the horror tropes might not hold up as much because of the I guess just the what you can get away with physically from a special effects standpoint at the time. But why I think The Exorcist works so well is that I've never considered that a horror film. I've always considered that more of a horrific drama. And that's
Mhm.
why that film has always stood the test of time for me. It is my favorite Freakin' film. It's one of my all-time favorite films.
Mhm.
And a lot of that is because I watch it every single time and it feels like a different movie every time, which I believe British critic Mark Kermode has also said about the film, and I do agree with him on that. You could
Mhm.
watch it as this beautiful relationship movie between a mother and daughter and how devastating that is. You can also watch it as a movie of faith versus evil when you look at it from Father Maron's perspective, or Father Maron is played by Max von Sydow, or Jason Miller's character, Father Karras. It's about loss of faith. So you
Mhm.
have like it literally is an ensemble piece because each subsequent story is basically its own narrative within an overarching story, which makes it one of the best layered and
Mhm.
well told movies from a scripting standpoint as well. So I think both those movies perhaps might be Freakin's best work because of what they did for their
Mhm.
respective genres, especially The Exorcist, because it takes itself so seriously and it's hard for a movie in that kind of horrific vein to successfully do that as well as it does.
Yeah, I think what's fascinating about The Exorcist, and this actually tethers quite heavily to what you're talking about there, especially when you look at this film within the filmography of Freakin' at the
Mhm.
time, right? Because this comes out in between The French Connection and Sorcerer.
Yeah.
And even when you look at much of his films that come out later, to Live and Die in LA,
Mhm.
we'll talk about The Hunted, Killer Joe,
Yeah.
you know, in some, and all, in some, a lot of the other films that are kind of in between. But I think what's interesting about The Exorcist, comparatively to a lot of other those films, and they're great for reasons that we'll talk about, but
Mhm.
William Friedkin was excellent at taking cinematic tropes and utilizing those to his advantage.
Mhm.
And so his films are often extremely vibrant. They're full of tension and paranoia. The cinematography is lush and exquisite. He gets some incredible scores in his movies. I mean,
Mhm.
these are the kind of movies you go to the cinema for. You want to see these on the big screen. He makes you feel his movies. They're like a great punch in the face.
They are. Yeah.
And I love that because not only do you get the visceral quality, the craft that comes with his filmmaking, but he was equally subversive. Earlier,
Yeah.
you opened up by talking about how challenging of a filmmaker he is, and absolutely, he loved
Yeah.
to end with ambiguity, for example. And
Well,
there's I can
he also like to make audiences feel unpleasant, right?
yes,
I don't
yeah,
think any of his movies have a pleasant vibe to them. It's to the point that if someone out there getting into movies in general were to watch all of Freakin's films, even his classics, and say I hated all of them, I don't know if I would be surprised,
mhm,
honestly, because like
yeah,
they are very polarizing, which I guess is kind of a dry word at this point now with regard to anything that could be subversive, right?
mhm.
But Freakin tried to do that. It was almost like his MO in many
Yeah,
ways.
and look, I find that breathtaking. I
Yeah.
love that about his movies, that he is challenging. He's willing
Mhm.
to subvert tropes or, tackle them in a new and different way, but also channel why audiences respond to cinema.
Yeah.
He was really great at finding and threading that needle perfectly. And I bring all of that up to say The Exorcist is this incredible outlier in the sense that the craft is there.
Mm-hmm.
The cinematography of this film, you can watch this on mute, and it is utterly engrossing.
Yeah.
It is gorgeous to look at. Sometimes
It does
not
not
so gorgeous.
feel like a film from 1973.
It really doesn't. I mean, this film is incredible to look at. There's an iconic musical cue with this film as well. What really separates The Exorcist, I feel like, from a lot of his other movies are the performances.
Mm-hmm.
There's something about Jason Miller and Ellen Burstyn specifically that to me is so striking in this movie, and somber. You have Chris's dire thirst for answers that is so deeply felt. The way Miller taps into religious indignancy is really powerful, and how those two things collide at the end of the film. Yes, it is a little intense from a filmmaking perspective. And, there's the horror, the quote unquote horrorness of it all. But what's really remarkable is less that, although I respect the craft, it's the performances that drive it more than anything else. And while I still have a few blind spots, so this might not be entirely true, but of all the movies I've seen, this is the one I would say more than anything else is performance driven. And
and that's not to undercut what Friedkin is doing as a filmmaker.
No, absolutely not.
If those performances were any less great, the film is still great. But there is an overarching sadness to this movie that I'm sure would have still been there, but I think it would have just been felt a little bit differently. One of my favorite examples in the movie, probably my favorite exchange in the whole movie, is right before the climactic end. Is a moment where Father Karras is simply sitting on the stairs, and Ellen Burstyn, Chris, comes over and just simply asks, "Is she going to die?"
Yeah.
And Karras's response, the look on his face as he just says no, that right there, as a simple uttering of one word, was the completion of that character's arc. It's absolutely mesmerizing. Like, it is a devastating movie, and that's why I keep going back to it. Like I don't see it as a horror movie. It has creepy and horrific things, but it's because it is so devastating. That is why the horror works.
And I agree. I think from both of those angles, both being Father Karras and this religious indignancy that he feels, how Miller taps into that, I think, is exquisite. It's just really terrific.
Yeah.
And there's something about the somberness of it, the subtlety of it. I mean, you know how I love an internalized performance, and that is a lot of what he's doing here. But
I think he gives one of the greatest performances of the 1970s, Jason Miller.
I don't disagree with that. I think it is striking. But here's the thing, right? Because we talk about this duality that, yes, I personally love and often respond to these reflective performances, this channeling of emotion internally and saying so much without saying anything at all. That is some of my personal favorite art. However, there are great performances that can be much, much louder than that. Enter in Ellen Burstyn because there are.
I thought you were about to say Linda Blair, but I mean, to be fair, Ellen Burstyn. I mean that's kind of an unfair.
It is very
polarity
unfair.
There.
Yeah, but Ellen Burstyn is this mother who is incredibly, deeply desperate, and I love how that comes through. Like that scene with the doctors when she just completely goes off. Like, what is wrong? What do I have to do? Even that first moment she has with Karras. She's like, "Are you going to help me or not? Like, what's going? Like, can you do this?" Like, she's very brazen about what she wants, and she doesn't have an answer. Like, these doctors don't have an answer. Can they perform this exorcism? Is that a thing? Because Karras's rebuttal is, this is a practice that is from like 1732. Like, this doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And she does not give a damn. Like, she just wants an answer. She just wants help. Can someone please help me? Will you help me? Yeah. And that desperation,
Well,
I think comes through incredible in her performance.
it also takes a great director to know how to create a film that feels so controlled and almost procedural to make a big performance like that still feel grounded and of a piece with everything
And
else.
that's the big thing. It's
Yeah.
not loud for the sake of being loud. It is rooted in a guttural humanity.
Yeah. Yeah, it absolutely is. And a lot of that is some of the storytelling choices that the film has. And a lot of that is credit to William Peter Blatty and his original novel, if a lot of these story beats were present in the novel as well, such as the like the MRI that Reagan has to get, which from what I remember, or at least from what I read, I think that was the scene that people were more or less running away from the theater during, because it feels like the operational aspect of it feels even more visceral than something like a Saw movie, right? And I think that grounded nature and how that weirdly like contradicts a performance like Ellen Burstyn's, almost it almost like pulls that performance in, kind of reins it in a little bit, so it doesn't go fully off the rails. But I think that's also a credit to Burstyn for knowing and understanding the material itself to know when to pull that back herself too. Like
exactly.
It's a perfect synergy of a director and writer knowing exactly what needed to be communicated and how to perform it. It's wonderful.
Absolutely, because in that moment, from a filmmaking perspective, there is something about the grounded nature of it that we're able to put ourselves in her shoes. And what I love about that sequence, despite how chilling it is visually, is this nice little cut to Chris in the window, and you get a nice little zoom in on Chris as she's watching this unfold, and it's one of the few moments that you can still sense the urgency in Chris, but she's also having to show a little patience and curiosity as to what is happening here.
Yeah.
But you get this zoom in on Chris that all at once demonstrates that sense of urgency, that demonstrates this desperation to find answers. And it's the one moment of the film where it is all self-reflective. She doesn't say anything in the moment. So you do kind of get this balance of how loud she is, but also again channeling that humanity.
Oh, it's so good.
It's incredible.
So good.
And that again, that's not to take anything away from the performances in some of these other movies. I mean, we'll talk about them as we go, because there's some phenomenal performances in these other movies.
Yeah.
But I don't know if, like, when I'm watching The French Connection or Sorcerer, which I definitely want to talk about, Live and Die in L.A., like those movies, I don't think are performance driven. That's freaking driving those trucks, if you will. That's
nice work there. I will say, if there's any other comparative from a performance standpoint, maybe we can talk about Gene Hackman in The French Connection.